And we also would wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, on whose land we are gathered today, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Anna. I'm not sure if Oli's happy with that photo. It's the best we could have got a high res one for you, Oli. Maybe the next one we'll touch it up a bit. Firstly, thanks to all the students for coming. I know that there's lots on this time of week. I'd also like to welcome David and Nikki and of course Anna who's led us off, who continue to support us and guide us through this semester. By way of the format of the session, and we're learning more and more around how we run these 1 hour industry engagement sessions. But fundamentally, it's really a fireside chat to give insights for the students into some of the journeys that people in the real world or in the commercial world are facing, and how we're trying to connect those into the learnings. We've asked the students to submit questions, so thanks again to all the students that have done that. Oli and I have had a chat today, and we've walked through some of those where we can group those into the discussion. And also, I'll be sort of guiding the conversation into the solution and ideation phase, which links into where the students are in their journey. So we're coming out of that problem domain space. That was part of the assessment today, or the submission today, which really is the forerunner into this solution and ideation phase. So without any further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll pass it over to Oli, and I'll get Oli to sort of introduce himself and his background, and then we'll get into it.
Cool. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming on this wet night to listen to me. I hope what I've got to share is of interest. So I think Adam's just asked me to introduce myself. So I'm originally from the UK. I've been living in Melbourne since about 2002, and for most of my career until 4 years ago, I had a fairly traditional approach. I was working for as an employee of different companies here and in England. And prior to joining Rounded, which is the startup that I helped to co-found, I had spent 5 years with LinkedIn. I'm sure you're all familiar with LinkedIn. When they opened in Australia, I was one of the first employees in their Melbourne office. And I guess that was probably my first exposure to that type of Silicon Valley environment, really being exposed to, well, not only going over to Silicon Valley, but meeting and spending time with the people that started and made LinkedIn the great company that it is today and the successful company that it is today, and started to sort of plant the seed in my mind that maybe I might be able to do something like that. So after 5 years at LinkedIn, it became pretty apparent that my journey there was at an end, and I managed to get a golden handshake on the way out the door, which was great, which certainly helps when you leave a solid salary and a really stable environment without knowing what you're going to do next. But I felt that if the big decision I made was that there was no way I was ever going to be open to something truly entrepreneurial if I could always fall back on health insurance and free meals and all of that sort of stuff. So ended up leaving, and then it became a case of working out what I was going to do next. So I took some time off, and amongst other opportunities that I was exploring, a personal friend of mine who's an entrepreneur had just invested in helping to get Rounded off the ground. He said we had a beer one day, and he said, "Look, I've got 2 engineers who've built this MVP, and this is what it's all about. And they need somebody who's going to run the business and who's going to get out there and get people using this product, because they don't have any idea about that." So, to cut a long story short, it seemed like the best of the options that I had. So I jumped into that pre-revenue. Just as the MVP launched, and 4 years later, I'm COO and co-founder of the company that is growing, and with a growing customer base across 2 different countries, a few thousand users, and generating real, if not particularly substantial revenue, but we're going in the right direction. And it's been 4 of the most valuable years of my career in terms of, I probably learned more in the last 4 years than I have in the 15 years before that. So hopefully that was what you wanted, Adam.
No, it was great, Ollie. No, it was really good, and I think it gives a backdrop into a journey, and your journey's not dissimilar to many people that come out of corporate life into startups. So that's valuable, Ollie. I'll kick off. This is a really it sounds like a simple question, but there's lots to this question, Ollie, and it'll get us going. And that is, it's from the floor, it's from the students. And during this ideation phase, when you're building out the product, how do you look for inspiration? What do you do to get inspired for new ideas to keep you fresh in with your customers?
So, I think there's probably 2 parts to that, and that you look directly at the part of the journey that you're on. So the whole point about launching an MVP is that it is a minimum viable product. It is the least that you need to get a usable product out there in the market. And so for the first couple of years after that, what we were trying to do was plug gaps and fill gaps. So what you're looking at is additional basic requirements that make your tool more usable. Now, probably I should have mentioned that Rounded, the startup that I'm involved in at the moment, is an accounting app designed specifically for freelancers and sole traders. So we've identified a particular niche in the market, and everything we do is around servicing that niche, and that also gives us a way to stand out in the market because no one else is doing that.
Just on that, Ollie, if I may, just a quick question. What problems specifically were you solving for the sole traders?
Yeah, and this is where my co-founder Grant, who built the app, he was a freelancer before he decided this. He was a digital nomad, freelance photographer, filmmaker, very creative, very talented, living and working all over the world. And what he found was that he could not find a suitable accounting app for his needs, i.e. one that was built for the local market, Australia, one that was easy to use and well designed, one that was not prohibitively expensive or overwhelmingly complex. And so the genesis of the idea came from him solving his own problem, which was, how can I run my business more effectively as a freelancer? And some say that's always, the genesis of all great ideas, because you solve your own problem. And so he built the first iteration of the product, which was what then became the Rounded MVP, as he realized that there was, he wasn't the only person in this boat. So to your original question, how do you get ideas? Holes. Accounting software in any form is not new. It's not particularly sexy. We weren't at that point doing a huge amount from a product perspective that hadn't been done before. We were doing it specifically for a market that had been chronically underserved, which helped us do it in a slightly different way. But what we needed was to make our product better. And we were doing that by going, well, here's a list of things that everybody else does that we don't. So before we start getting anything too flashy, we need to fill these gaps. So, and how I guess for us, it was how we prioritized it. And that all came from feedback from the users.
Yep. Ollie, in terms of the prioritization, so you've now got the solution or idea and the inspirations coming from your users. So in short, in what we've been working through with the students in their journey is now getting something out in a prototype form. Now, a group of students, really, that's going to be have very low fidelity. You're able to get a product to market that you can get that feedback. How did you then prioritize that feedback to say, well, that item should be prioritized over anything else that you were doing?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and again, we didn't always get that right, but what it came down to in the end, and it was practice like anything else, that we had to first of all build a couple of basic principles that we layered across every product decision, those basic principles we found were around centering us on who our main core customer was and making sure that we were helping them. Because if you're looking at freelancers and sole traders, you've got anyone from very high-end, white-collar, professional type of freelancers to a bloke who might run a Jim's Mowing franchise. And you've got, what you build for Jim's Mowing is totally different to what you build for a guy at the other end. Not to say that they're not both viable, successful businesses and all that, but what we found was we were a little bit like, in the early days, trying to please everybody, and customers would get cross and we'd go over here, and then customers would get cross and we'd run over here, and we'd just be chasing our tails all the time. And so as we begin to build out the product, and as we listen more to our customers and realized, we began to understand this is the demographic of customer that we serve best. And we've got 0.0000001% of those customers right now. So before we worry too much about expanding out to a lot of other stuff, let's nail as much of this low-hanging fruit as we can. So we had to be very disciplined, which is really super hard. We had to be very disciplined about really focusing on that core demographic and, making sure that two things. One, in terms of prioritization, does this go in the list of things we consider as something that is going to add tangible value for our customers, number one. Number two, can we build it in a reasonable time frame? Because if it takes 6 months, it's too long. Number three is, and this is probably the most important thing when it comes to priorities, when we have a development team of 2 engineers and 1 designer, and they pump out the work of teams of 10 or 15. They're unbelievable. So, but what that means is that they're always at 100% capacity. And if you put 10% extra in at the top, 10% falls out of the bottom. There's no other way around it. Basic math. So the other thing that we have to be super comfortable with when it comes to prioritization is for every one thing you do, there's probably 50 or 100 things that you're not doing.
Yep.
So it's like, if we do this, are we happy with all the other things that we're not going to do?
Yep. So it's almost to get to that decision of what you do, you knock out the things that you don't want to do or you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. So you knock out the things. So it's, does this fit the basic requirements of helping our core customer? If not, then it doesn't go into any further. If the answer's no, then it gets taken off the list.
Yep.
If it does, then you prioritize it against all the other things that do. Then you can knock out things that might take too long. You can knock out things that might be too complicated, and then you're looking at, okay, well, here's something that 50% of our customers are asking for, but we can't really charge money for, based on maybe only 40% of our customers are asking for, but we can charge money for. So again, depending on where you're at in your journey, do you take we need to plug this product gap, or we need to do something that will allow us to create expansion revenue or whatever it is. So and I guess going back to where I started from, so this is where the product journey changes. So we spent the first 2 years building the app till it began to be acknowledged as the best accounting app for freelancers and sole traders in the country. Once we got to that point, and the reputation, the security, the user experience had taken on a life of its own, i.e. that we had developed a significant number of brand advocates, that they were taking care of our marketing for us, referring other people, but giving us confidence we were on the right lines, then you can sort of change and go, right, well, now we can really look at like exciting stuff and begin to think of, okay, well, what is nobody else doing, and then begin to layer that across your client feedback, and you go through the whole thing again. But the basic principles are the same. It just depends on the lens through which you look.
Right. And I've got a question here, Oli, which is, and it's relating to data and how you're getting that data back from the customers. So, and I'm going to tease this out a little bit around the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. So we've been really going through the journey of getting more qualitative, high-touch, dirty data, that you might call it. Like, it's fairly, it's not that empirical, because you might only be getting feedback from half a dozen to 12 clients. And I noticed when you register on your platform, straight away someone's coming. I think it's you most of the time coming up in a chat box.
Yeah, less so now than it used to be, thankfully. But yeah. So I guess like this stems from this stems. So capturing data is something we take very seriously, and we do it in a number of ways. But what you're talking about is I guess one of the first lessons that we learned about, again, how we can distinguish ourselves. I'm probably digressing a bit here, but if you're a freelancer and a sole trader and you're buying enterprise software and you're buying Xero or MyOb, you're buying the smallest, tiniest license with the least product suite that they can sell you. And so you're down there in the, we might answer your support email if we can type of thing. And as a freelancer, one of the things that we got was nobody listens, nobody cares, and we get treated like, like dirt because we're not like a 50-person company.
Yep.
So we felt that finding a way to make sure that we could communicate really responsibly and make people feel like valued customers was something we could do and provide an experience that the other big companies were doing, and it wasn't necessarily dependent on how much money we had.
Yep.
And so to do that, we use, and I am coming to your point, we use a platform called Intercom.
Okay.
Intercom's a pretty big, they've raised almost $1 billion now, Irish company to start with. And they're an all-in-one platform for live chat, structured communication, so things like onboarding. They house all of our help desk articles, amongst other things, allow us to do marketing campaigns, both in-app and email. But also we can, this is more technical, is that we can implant webhooks into Intercom, which means that we can capture data from not only the qualitative data and the anecdotal data from chats that we have, which is all recorded with our users, but also the quantitative data in terms of how many people are clicking on this button, how many people are creating an invoice, how many people are using X, Y, and Z. And we can build that into Intercom to make sure that we can understand what's going in to the app.
Yep. So let me I want to hone in on the process by which you came. Let me go back another step. When you're launching a product, a lot of us get caught up in the concept that the technology is the innovation or the feature is the innovation, etc. But if you boil it down, generally it's the business model, how you're engaging with the customer, and how did you determine, or how did you understand that the difference between the experience that the users were having with these larger systems like MyOb and what you were going to deliver for Rounded, because it comes a cost with that. At what point did you think that was the real innovative step to get these customers engaged? Because it's Sorry, Adam, go ahead. Yep.
No, I just going to say, look, to me, it wasn't particularly inspirational. My background has always been, relationships, customer success, that kind of thing. Whether that's be on, customer success side or the sales side. And, over a career in that, you learn that it doesn't matter what you're doing, sort of personal relationships are the key to getting anything done, whether it's with colleagues, whether it's with customers. And when I first came on board and started taking on board, started building out our customer success approach and how we were going to do it, instantly, like on day one, or when we first had our first person live chat going, hey, I've got a problem with X, or can you help me with Y? And you get back to them instantly, and you give them the answer. And literally at that point, they were like, wow, I didn't expect you to respond. Thanks for helping me. And then that became self-generating, because if you look at Rounded on the Play Store, if you look at Rounded on Facebook or whatever, like one of the bits of people who recommend us and people who talk about us talk about the great support that we're able to provide them. And we could see that for our customers, that sort of, hands-on approach to it, and the feeling that we could give them of helping them, being invested in them, meant that, again, they became great brand advocates, but B, and I think the other thing is live chat gives people, it's given us and gives our customers a very easy way to capture feedback and to give and receive feedback.
Yep.
Because it's not like sending an email and you either get no response or an automated response and you don't know who's reading it or whether or not it gets passed in. To be able to say, we've heard your feedback, we've passed it on to the team, and for us internally to be able to tag it and to categorize it so that we can go back retrospectively and look at it. Again, it just added to the richness of the experience. And then when you combine that with what Grant and the engineering and the product team do in terms of building something that was, beautiful and simple and unintimidating and, priced, very, very competitively compared to the larger ones. Again, it's sort of, you begin to sort of understand what the magic recipe is.
Yep. Oli, tell me when you're in Australia and New Zealand.
Yep.
But you've also pushed into some other international markets, which I found really interesting because, just to share with the team, the Rounded team knew that their product wasn't complete for those markets. But you pushed ahead anyway. Could you firstly share with the team as to how you understood that your product was incomplete, and secondly, why you pushed in and what information you've got once you've gone into those markets?
Yeah, so I guess Rounded is available to use all over the world. However, the most geographically specific experiences are in Australia and New Zealand. We chose New Zealand for a number of business reasons, proximity, language, and the tax system is almost identical. Okay. Again, what we do in Australia that nobody else does for freelancers, sole traders, is natively manage GST and requirements for that. So we wanted to do the same in New Zealand. So we decided that we were going to go through one round of development to produce a New Zealand specific version of the app, taking into account the fact that icons and currency amounts needed to be different, that reports needed to be slightly different, but probably 80 or 90% of the app translated very well. But we didn't charge for it. We didn't charge for it straight away, and we did the same in the UK as well for the same reasons, and we pushed out in both of those. And we didn't charge for it for two reasons. One is because of some technical gaps that we knew we weren't able to fill, but we didn't have the time to, and we wanted to get it into the market. And two, because we didn't want a barrier to entry at that point to be able to get that feedback. And we wanted to be able to get the app into the hands of users, because we as a startup, we couldn't market it.
Yeah,
there was nothing we could do to, we didn't have any money to go on a big advertising campaign in New Zealand and do a big song and dance about the fact that we were there. So, I think it was one of those where we launched in New Zealand, and I spent, a week or two, finding New Zealand sites where freelancers hang out, harvesting every single publicly available email address that I could find, sending emails through LinkedIn, just literally cold reaching out to freelancers saying, have a look at this.
Yep.
And slowly people began to use it. And then that cycle began again. And we began to see, actually, there were a few people that sign up who are tire kickers who just want to have a look. But there were people and users in New Zealand who began to use it. In England, at the same time, we tried the same thing, but we realized very quickly that it was a step too far. And where we were probably 80–85% in New Zealand, in the UK, we were probably 60 or 70% with some huge technical requirements, right, and government requirements to get to where we need to be. So that's been parked. So anyway, then again, we began receiving feedback from New Zealand users, what's missing, some things we've missed. And again, we could have moved quicker, but then eventually after sort of just under 12 months, we had the space for that second round of development. We ticked off the boxes of, everything that, all the things that we could do quickly that our New Zealand users were looking for. And then we gave them a month's notice. And it's like, you send the video, we're going to start charging, or you send the email, and we were expecting a little bit of negative feedback, and we weren't really sure, but we didn't get a peep. And from no marketing, no spend, and it's still small numbers, we converted 10% of all of the trial users that we had, which in my line of business is a pretty good conversion rate with little engagement. So we were pretty happy with it. So we're now generating revenue from New Zealand as well, and eventually we hope to be able to push into that market a bit more. But we've got a fairly comfortable, happy client base there.
No, it's a great approach, Oli, and I think what it demonstrates, because it does tie into another question that was asked around how do you, as a startup with limited resources, build out the product and get it to market, etc. And I think you've actually described that as part of the journey really well. And I think what's also interesting there for us to think about as we work through our way through the semester is, even if you know you're not ready, you're better off getting out there. And I think what the guys at Rounded did very cleverly is actually entered the market humbly, with respect. In other words, here's a tool, it's free, we know it's incomplete, we know there's gaps, etc. Play with it, and they went back and invested it. So all of a sudden, those users start to own that. Oli, did you get a feel of that the users who stayed with you felt like they were part of the ownership of the product?
Yeah, and I think the other important thing as well is that we thought long and hard about pricing when we launched it, and in fact, actually, to be more specific, we thought long and hard about not pricing, because what we felt was we can't advertise this as free.
Yeah.
Because if people have the expectation that something's free, and then whether it's 6, 12 months later, whenever it is you go, oh, you're going to have to pay now, they get angry about it. So we built. So we had to use some technical wizardry, but we built a New Zealand specific pricing page that said it's free for now. This is, we will charge you for it eventually. We don't know when that is. Here's our Australian pricing. It will be similar.
Great.
And we'll give you plenty of notice. And we also built that very clearly into all of our onboarding communication that people got when they first joined the app. So, that was the other thing that meant that when we finally, decided to push the button on monetizing the New Zealand part of the app, nobody could accuse us of being underhand and trying to build a freemium or whatever it was. So we were super clear about that, and that really worked well.
Yeah. Well, I think it engages on that empathy side that we've been talking to the students about. How do you actually engage with your customers with empathy? And I think if we can understand them and engage with them and communicate with them in that form, you get a very loyal base. Another thing I want to talk about, Oli, is Net Promoter Score and what that means, and how you work to that, and why is that a valuable thing to have when you're ideating and building out your product? Do you want to explain that to the students, what the Net Promoter Score is?
Yeah, so Net Promoter Score is, or NPS, as you might have heard it, is a way to measure how many of your customers would happily refer your product to somebody they know. So the question, the standard question with the Net Promoter Score survey is how likely, so from 0 to 10, how likely are you to refer this product to someone you know? And then there's a little mathematical equation that, so if they give you 0 to 6, they are a detractor, and you get a negative mark, and it's all proportion based on how many people are in each segment. There is a website called npscalculator.com, which is how we actually take our figures and get the Net Promoter Score. So share that. It's free to use. It's called NPS Calculator. So then if they give you a 7 or an 8, a 7 or an 8 are the worst scores that you can get in a Net Promoter Score survey, because they're neutral, which still means they won't refer you. But if they give you a 9 or a 10, then they will then they're likely to proactively refer you. And if you go to companies with high NPSs, Apple traditionally has a high NPS, Tesla has a high NPS, banks traditionally have very low NPS. There's all sorts of data and information on the web around different industries and NPS. So ours has always been particularly high, but I guess the thing about NPS is that in isolation, it doesn't mean a lot. We would do a survey around product and value and other different things, and have the NPS question in there. But again, if you only ask existing customers and active users the NPS question, they're likely to tell you what you want to hear.
Right.
So we then, after doing it a few years, we then started to expand out. And the problem is that those people who might have done your free trial and decided not to continue with the subscription are less likely to do a survey as well. But certainly asking non-active users and people who, within the last few months had decided not to continue subscribing to our product, definitely changed the input. So I guess, when you look at NPS, it's a guide. So one NPS survey in isolation is probably fairly useless. We do them every 6 months. So we do them twice a year. And now we've got six different NPS scores over the last 3 years, combined with everything else we know about our customers and everything else. And it just helps as a guidance, as a point in conjunction with mapping against all of the other data that you know and have, to show you that, we're mostly on the right track. People are still happy with what we're doing.
Yeah. When we had a chat today, you talked about, or I'll go back a step. We're creating these online environments for ideation, given that we can't operate in an offline world today. But we'll come out of that. In the case of Rounded, do you want to share how fluid and dynamic your sessions were, and how and how you ideated those ideas? And it was a different approach to what we've looked at with what a Google Ventures has done through classic brainstorming and rule techniques. You had a smaller team that probably had a great understanding, but do you want to share with the team the method that you used and the environment that you set up?
Sure. I mean, look, we've tried. We tried. And again, tried is probably the wrong word. We've done it a number of different ways. There've been times when we've sat in a meeting room in the office that we've had in the central Melbourne, and we've whiteboarded stuff, and where we've needed that sort of ability to sort of visualize things. But it's always, the best conversations that we've had have always tended to be organic, and the three of us who are involved in making the majority of these decisions all worked in a small open plan office, and it would be it might be kicked off by a data point, or a comment from a customer, or just a conversation that we'd be having, and it would turn into a conversation with the three of us. And depending on where we were in the conversation, it might be, okay, well, we need to go and put this on a whiteboard and develop it out a bit. But it might be, but normally it would just be a frank exchange of ideas that would lead to a decision being made there and then. So yeah, very fluid, very organic.
And how do you build that relationship to make sure that someone doesn't hold that back? How do you let that idea that might sound a bit crazy at some point, but might lead you to that pearl of wisdom? How did you create that? Was that also organic, or did you put something more structured in place to start there?
No, I mean, I think that comes down to the relationship that we have as a management team. We're again, this is probably part of the luck that when I got the luck, part of the luck of the choice that I made was that the other, important people, key people involved in the business had, very complementary but very different skill sets.
Right.
So throughout the life of this, and founder relationships are key. And it just so happens that there's been very clear demarcation in the areas of the business that we've carved out for ourselves. And we don't tend to step on each other's toes. And therefore, we can all give a perspective on an idea that complements everything. And then wherever the follow-up for that idea lands, that person takes it and takes it on. And, there's been just as many conversations, whether it's been sort of, more formally in the office or, even over beers. This is, there's been many long nights, after work beers that have gone on a bit too long, where we've got deeply into stuff. Unfortunately, we can't do that at the moment. But yeah, that's I guess that's just one of the things. We're still at that size where we don't have we've got a very flat structure. We don't have a layer of middle management. We don't have lots of people that need to be involved in a decision. We don't have any bureaucracy about decision making. Like if it feels good to the three of us, we do it, and it's as simple as that. And that's, I guess, one of the perhaps one of the advantages of being as small as we are.
Yep. In terms of, I want to go back to the customers that failed to subscribe, the ones that dropped off, the one that obviously as they went on their journey with you for some reason weren't satisfied in what they were trying to achieve. What was there? Did you find that there were themes in that, or were they so sporadic? Was it industry related? Was it the product not fitting a particular market segment, or was it what were some of the themes that you found in trying to make the product better based on that feedback?
Yeah. So I think, again, the guiding philosophy is, again, it comes down to knowing your customer. And it's the same thing, it's understanding. So when it comes to negative feedback, and there has been, we've had plenty, we have to layer it across the fact that we know that we have always been focused on a very specific demographic, which conversely means you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're not for everybody. And you have to acknowledge that really quickly. Like, it's one thing, when somebody comes to the website and you're talking to them, to give them the big sales spiel, but you also have to be conscious of people's time. And if you don't think you can help that person for a particular reason, you have to be able to tell them. Now, that said, if we get feedback from somebody who we don't view as core, then, that doesn't detract from the experience that that customer or that trialist has had. It's perfectly valid, but we can sort of put that down to saying, yeah, well, we understand your frustration, or we understand that we didn't work for you, but we don't do that. And so we're clearly not the right solution for you. Sorry, you try something else. Yeah. And again, you constantly have to reassess that, and there've been times where, we might be in that position on a particular bit of feedback at one point, and then 6 months later, it's like, okay, well, this is bigger than we thought it was, and so we really need to do something about it. But that comes through, again, weight of feedback and diversity of feedback. If you're getting, fortunately for us, we don't get, a huge amount of negative feedback from the core customers that we do support. And it was more in the early days when we had significant product gaps, and that's what you need to fill. So I think, again, whether you're looking at making product decisions, whether it's positive feedback, negative feedback, NPS, no one data point or no one piece of anecdotal feedback is ever enough to influence what you should be doing. And in the early days, it was. And that's kind of what I was saying before about knowing your customer. The thing was always knee-jerk. It's like, shit, we need every customer we've got. This guy's ranting and raving, and we don't want him to put a bad review on Facebook, so we better jump to it and stop everything that we're doing and sort this guy out. And then you realize after a while, and this comes through the confidence of having more customers, right? That you don't need to react like that. And we're now like, we can now take a deep breath and go, right, okay, well, here's all the data points and here's all the stuff that we know. Does this stand up to any kind of scrutiny, or is this just the inane ramblings of a madman that we can put down to not really having to listen to? So
it's really important. What you're saying is the filtering, making sure you've got multiple data points and lenses on the problem to build up a statement of the type of customer that you're looking for. We'll call it a persona, if that's the word, and then understanding that journey all the way through. Oli, a couple of things, or a question I think is something that the students are, as they're moving into this ideation solution phase, moving into a form of prototype, what advice would you give them, being in isolation, for them to prototype at home? Anything
Yeah.
you're doing that's been different from the office environment that you've had to bring it online? Any tools that you're using that you've had to bring in and incorporate, or that you've been looking at?
Look, I would think for us, our business is entirely digital.
Yeah.
So from the outset, we've been lucky that, you know, the only thing that we can't have, or we can't do, you know, or we couldn't do with it. And the only reason that we had an office is that, you know, human face-to-face and physical contact is an important part of who we are. But from a practical point of view, like there's nothing I can't do at home. There's no information or data that I can access. There's nothing, you know. So we're kind of okay with that. We had everything in place to run a digital business. But what I would say to the students is, if you're looking to prototype, I think as we've been talking, that getting multiple data points and as much information and feedback as you can is probably key. Like at some point you can get enough feedback and you're just going to have to take a punt and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
But for now, you know, there is, you know, the fact that we're isolated shouldn't make too much of a difference in terms of finding people to help validate your idea using, you know, Zoom, WhatsApp, Facebook, you know, every single platform available that is able to connect you virtually to people that you might need to speak to. You know, if you haven't got anybody to talk to, there's, you know, WhatsApp groups, Twitter, Reddit, you know, all of these forums online that allow you to find people with a similar interest or expertise that you're looking for. So to me, you know, the fact that this can all be done digitally, you know, is, you know, I mean, thank God that, you know, this hasn't happened, what we're facing now 10 years ago, before the internet and technology allowed us to connect in all of the ways that we have. And you know, all sorts of forums and things like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a website called Product Hunt, which is amazing for new products. You know, a lot of people will go on Product Hunt with their MVP. You have to jump through quite a few hoops to be featured, but then you put your idea on Product Hunt, and then people in the technology space will ask you questions, will give you feedback, you know, whatever. But if they like it, it can be a brilliant, like, rocket ship for your product. So many good products have started on Product Hunt, because you're taking your MVP and you're throwing it out there and saying, right, hit me with the best and the worst that you've got. So, you know, to me, it shouldn't make any difference that we have the technology and you know, with internet and the forums and everything else to find all the information, all the validation, access to the people, all the feedback, even if it's not face-to-face discussion like this, it's all out there. So it shouldn't, I don't think it should hamper you at all, being in isolation.
Yep, yep. I've got another question from the students, and it's, do you think a startup main goal is to solve problems? It sounds like a simple question, and when I read it first, I thought but I think there's a couple of layers to that. You can treat that a few ways, can't you?
Yeah, but I guess solving problems. I mean, it depends. I think that, you know, if you're a technology startup, and I think, you know, that's my area of expertise, that you have to be able to demonstrate value, and you know, you may describe what that value is as solving a problem. I mean, you know, I look at the apps in my life that I use. You know, Zoom to me is a great app because it solves a problem.
Yeah.
For me, you know, it allows face-to-face contact and all of that stuff. You know, I look at Netflix, for instance, also a great app. I wouldn't consider that to solve a problem. It sort of, it fills a gap, but it's not something that I would consider to be a problem, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But Netflix adds tangible value in my life as a distraction and you know, a source of great content. So I think it depends. If you're looking at a sort of a business focused app, then you have to, again, understand your customer and be able to articulate how you make their life better.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that if you're an entertainment app, Netflix does that. Netflix says, I can give you access, you know, to very high quality content whenever you want, wherever you want. And that's, you know, clearly filling a market requirement, a market need. And they can articulate that very quickly. Same with Spotify or whatever it is. So I think as long as you know, as long as the core of the idea is delivering value of some sort, that's what startups should be doing. Because if there's no value, there's no business.
But that exactly, and I think the question, which sounds simple enough, the short answer is yes, it should be solving problems. Yeah. But the question is, does that problem actually equate to value to the user?
Yeah.
And then the next question is you know, then can you solve the problem? Are you the team to solve the problem? You know, and to your point, you found when you entered the UK market that yes, there's obviously a market. There's obviously problems in that sole trader like market in the UK. But then you worked out that, okay, well, the gap between what you had and how you would solve those problems gave you the next question is, are we the ones to solve it? And the answer was not for now.
Not for now. Yeah, exactly right.
So I think to extend that question out, it's almost like a question that needs a series of follow-ups, doesn't it? Yes, they've got to solve a problem. Is the value created? And are we the ones to solve it? And then even the extension of that, is it worth solving? You know, even though you're creating value, can you monetize it? Can you generate it? Yeah.
That's right. And I think that I guess the problem or the value should be the starting point for any thoughts about starting a business, whatever it may be. Again, to use, you know, the example of Rounded, you know, the start of the business was, you know, an acknowledgement that there was a lack or a gap in the market of, you know, cloud-based accounting is nothing new, but focusing on that specific demographic was. And that put us in a position not to be, well, we'll do something for sole traders because we kind of have to, and some of them will pay for it, but we don't really care. It's not our core business. To you are what we think about like night and day. And, you know, we built the app to be very squarely focused on that demographic, which allows us to understand and solve their problem. And it means our voice can be very authentic and all of those things when it comes to the marketing aspect of what it is. You know, Netflix solved the problem originally of people, you know, thinking that going down to the DVD store was clunky and a waste of time. And you know, obviously they're the blockbuster killer. And it was the advent of the internet that allowed people to consume content in a completely different way. And they've been, you know, they were the first organization to be able to work that out.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, the same with, you know, a lot of other businesses. So, you know, Intercom that we use, you know, found a way to completely change the way that customers that companies interact with their customers. And, you know, again, Intercom have been around a while. They seem to be the incumbent, and there are all sorts of, you know, newer, younger companies that are now coming on thinking that they could do that better.
Yeah.
So the cycles move pretty quickly, and you've got to keep it up.
They definitely do. Oli, just a couple of, in terms of any tips or advice to budding entrepreneurs amongst the group. I've got a question from the floor, basically asking, do you have any recommendations for a new entrepreneur that wants to start a business?
Well, difficult question to answer. I guess it depends on what kind of an entrepreneur you are. Are you technical? You know, are you somebody that has an idea of a software that you can build and you need help on the business side? You know, are you more of a business entrepreneur that you might have an idea and you're looking for somebody more technical to help bring that to life? Yeah. I mean, I sort of still struggle to see myself a little bit as an entrepreneur because it's still, you know, in my mind, I've never been one. And so I'm still transitioning to allowing myself to think that way. But I think whatever it is, the people around you, like finding good people is the key to anything.
Okay, great.
And that was where, and you're going to need luck in you know, when you approach sort of being an entrepreneur, going a startup, you're going to need some luck, and there's going to be some trial and error, and you're going to but you just have to, you have to sort of work through that and see that as a learning opportunity. If it were me, if you're an entrepreneur of any kind, every single coffee is worth having. Every single meeting is worth taking. Every single idea is worth listening to. At the beginning, just go and talk to as many people as you can, whether you're going to meetups or whatever it is, to allow you not only to develop the idea and gain feedback, but to get practice in pitching your idea and explaining it to people. Because if you can't get people to understand it in theory, you'll never make it work in practice. Yeah. So that was me. We've always said that the best things that have happened at Rounded have always been off the back of meetings I didn't really want to go to.
Right. Okay.
And you go there, and all of a sudden something happens, or somebody introduces you to someone else. And I guess that's the other thing. Like, we spent, you're always looking for where's that silver bullet going to be that's going to take us from an unknown startup in Melbourne to, me on the cover of Forbes magazine with Mark Zuckerberg or whatever it is. Yeah. And again, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen to normal people. But what does happen is instead of looking for the silver bullet, just look for the next, we talk about it, it might not be the thing, but it could be the thing that gets you to the thing. We've been through a number of different cycles in our business, and generally we sort of get retrospective towards Christmas time. And, a few times we've looked back in 12 months and we've gone, well, that didn't quite work out exactly how we thought it was, but look where we are now. We're not quite where we thought we'd be, but we are a completely different business to what we were 12 months ago because we did these things. I don't know, a bit of a rambling answer, but
it's
hopefully that helps.
It certainly does. I think the key takeaways I think out of this session, Oli, and I just wanted to, on behalf of all the students, thank you for your time. We're getting close to the hour, but I just wanted to sort of round up and just sort of frame some things up in being sort of outside, but seeing your journey over recent times is what I've really enjoyed with what you guys are doing is the courage of putting a product to market, the MVP. I've seen that, and we talk about that with the students. I've seen so often where people are looking for perfection rather than progress. So I think you're a real epitome of that real simple philosophy and having the courage to do that. But also the way that you bring that information and really calmly dissect it and honestly and humbly engage with that market in a way, and I know we've talked about this, that you don't want to do anything that is seen as underhand. It's been, really connected into that human-centered approach, which we've been working through with the students, of really understanding the customer, really understanding their problem, understanding that because you know that understanding, when you launch something, you know where the gaps are generally. You've communicated that free, so they're very accepting when you've closed them out as well. And I think this is one of the principles I think for the students to take on board is, if you can find those users that are willing, particularly the innovative users, the ones that are willing to take something that's rough and ready, willing to be, hey, I really like where you're heading with this. It is going to solve my problem. There's nothing else out there. To get that feedback's invaluable. And the way that you've mashed the data points, whether it's quantitative sort of data, whether it's qualitative data, the engagement with the customers, pushing it out there to the markets. But also what I've liked, and we've talked about this leading it to this point, is the focus at certain junctures. Launched into New Zealand, you know that there's a product gap, right? We're now focusing all our resources to close that gap down, rather than being 60% across a series of markets. You've said, right, we're gonna nail that customer journey to the point where they're satisfied and willing to pay. Tick. Next one, tick. And then once you get to the UK and you circle back to that component again and make that assessment whether you go or not, you're making it in a very clear and succinct way. So you're not wasting a lot of time making the decision. Yeah. Which I think's been really cool. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the team before we wrap it up, Oli?
Well, there's just a question there in chat. I think Akshay asked, how do you find a problem worth solving?
Oh, yeah.
And I think, when you were talking there, it made me think that you have to start with what you know. You know, if I decided that all of a sudden I wanted to find a vaccine for COVID-19, I'd be completely incapable of doing it. It's not something I know anything about. I know that's a bit of an extreme example, but one of the reasons why I got involved with Grounded is that Grant, my co-founder who built the app, was clearly able to articulate to me the reason why he built the app. Right? To solve a very real problem for him. And then you take that, you know, sort of anecdotal story from a credible source, and you go, okay, well, how big's the market? You know, and that was my second thing. And you look at the fact that there are 1.6, 1.7 million solo businesses in this country. Yeah. And if you can see the problem and understand the problem, and understand again from a competitive analysis, there's really nobody doing exactly what you're doing, and that might be very nuanced, as ours is. There's tons of cloud accounting apps. Yeah. But there was nobody doing what Grant doing and solving that specific problem for that specific demographic. Yeah. And so to me, all that added up to a worthwhile punt. And as I say, you know, here we are. So for those who are, you know, sort of looking around and going, what problem do I solve? Well, I'd say to you, start with what you know. Yeah, it's good advice. And it's something that we've been talking to the students about. You know, we've got some fairly big problems and problem domains such as poverty alleviation, or, you know, or some of the other area, you know, student life. And I'll use those as the two extremes. We've tried to bring students into the world which might be more Australian focused, because there is poverty here. And I'm not necessarily in this exercise worried about whether the problem is massive or not. It's more that process of saying, right, we've identified a problem, we can engage with the customer, we can have the potential of building something out that we can solve through whatever that may be, what sort of technology it is. The student services side is they are students. They can connect with students, they can interview students. So I think it's really good advice to be able to pull them back as the group start to define their group problem statement and their group customer journey, that they do have an ability to connect with that and solve that particular problem. But Oli, at 6 o'clock, I promised you we'll chat at 6 o'clock. Thanks for your time, and thanks to all the students for coming along. And I hope everyone got a lot out of the session. Until then, everyone stay well and healthy and safe, and we'll catch up again on Thursday night. Thanks, Adam. Cheers, mate. Thanks, guys. See ya.